Afternoon, Jane.
Hello, Peter.
This is Jane Arnfield, and Jane is the Associate Professor of Theatre and Drama,
Performance.
Performing Arts at Northumbria University. But the main reason I'm talking to you today, Jane, is because you've done, am I right in saying, two one-person shows with Mike? Is that
Yeah,
right?
that's correct. We have. Yeah.
Okay, so let's start at the very beginning.
Okay.
Um, how did you get to know Mike? How did that connection ever happen?
Okay. Well, I met Mike. I met him through the writer Philip Osmond. Philip Osmond cast me in a play for Red Ladder. It was a play that Philip Osmond had written called Sleeping Dogs, and I worked with Red Ladder in the mid-90s touring production, and I met Mike because of Philip, because Mike came to see one of those performances. So that's how I met him. But I actually had seen Mike's work at the National Theatre, The Wandering Jew. So I saw that when I was a student. I went to Dartington College of Arts from 84 to 88. And in 87, I had a placement year in London, and I had a wonderful tutor who told me to go and see as much as I possibly could and would give me a list every Monday of what to see. And that was on the list, and I went to see it. So that was my first introduction. And also Mike Alfreds had written a theatre paper for Dartington College of Arts. They had a series of theatre papers. So I knew about his work before I met him.
Did you have any idea of the sort of the history of his work, the shared experience stuff, and all that?
I knew about that from the theatre paper that I had read. So yes, I knew about his philosophy of working, his working with an ensemble. Yes, I was aware of that. Yeah.
And do you have any, just a sort of tangential question, do you have any recollection of Wandering Jew?
Yeah, I mean, I just was amazed at the storytelling. I mean, it's a long time ago now, but there are visual moments that stick with me. Still have the program. It was that sense, Peter, of being in the theatre for a duration. It was over a period of days, and it was that idea of sustaining a storytelling over such a long period, but just coming away from the theatre with a head full of stories and then going back to the theatre for the next installment. I was very immersed in the work. I'm very interested in how you could just completely transport an audience, somebody in the audience, into different worlds. I mean, I just think like Mike Alfred's work does that, expertly.
Mm,
So that's what I
yeah.
remember. Yeah.
So interesting. Okay, so you kind of come to Mike much later on
Yeah.
than I have, for instance, um, and you knew Philip, and Philip introduced you. Did you kind of talk to Mike at that point, or?
I did. He gave me a note, which was wonderful. Yeah, I was playing a young teenager, and he said there's a particular scene which was a tricky scene, and I don't think I'd ever really found the kind of objective of it or was playing it correctly. And Mike said, why don't you have an activity? Perhaps you could be sewing or doing something, and in order to put your point of concentration, your focus. And so yeah, so my first interaction with Mike Alfreds was actually to receive a note from him, which was rather wonderful.
Okay, so you've thrown up two ideas there that we might have to come back to a bit later in order to kind of clarify, because you've talked about an objective and you've also talked about one of Mike's techniques, which is a point of concentration.
Yeah.
And much later on in the interviews that I do with Mike, he talks about his techniques, his working techniques, and a whole episode is given over to points of concentration and of course a massive amount on objectives.
Yeah.
Um, Useful note.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, it worked.
And did it work?
Yeah.
Okay, so how many years later do you reconnect?
Okay, so that was the mid 90s. Well, sort of early 90s, I would think. I'm just trying to think. I graduated from Dartington in 88. So it was probably around 92, around that time. And then Mike set up his company, Method Madness. So I was invited to audition for the first ensemble, which was a small ensemble of 4 actors. So I didn't get selected for that. And then Mike expanded it later on for 10 actors, and he offered me a place in that ensemble. So I think, if I'm right, that was around 98. So, there was probably a good 5 years gap there. I saw his work. So I saw the work of the ensemble that he had with Method Madness. And so I was kind of keeping in touch with what he was directing and making. But yeah, that was when I then, entered into the company, Method and Madness, for a 3-year contract duration. And this was the idea of doing the 5 plays over the spanning the 20th century. So, and being immersed in his method and being taught his method as well.
It's interesting when you talk about method. I've interviewed Ian McKellen, and he uses the word method, and I always feel the need to say this is not the kind of American method, as it were. It's not encouraging you to be method actors in the sense that the Americans, Kazan and that lot were doing.
Yeah.
But all the techniques that he used in order to elicit the work. So you said how many productions? 5?
That was originally how we started. So we began with the Cherry Orchard, and the idea was to start with something at the 20th century and then end up with a devised piece. So the company would have been together for a long period of time, built trust, like with shared experience, kind of all of those pieces. And then the last piece would be a devised piece, kind of coming into like the next century, really kind of thinking about what that might be. The company didn't actually go to that length. It finished at about 18 months, but we'd already done quite a number of pieces. So we did the Cherry Orchard. That was the first piece, and I played Varia. And then we did Demons and Dibbooks, which Mike Alfreds adapted from Isaac Bashevis Singer's short stories. So there were 10 short stories, and all of the actors had a story which was cast as their story, and then we would be supporting in other stories, and we were on stage all the time. I mean, for me, it was one of the most extraordinary pieces of work. I just completely, the storytelling techniques, being part of an ensemble, all of the kind of narrative forms that Mike taught me and taught the ensemble of how, the different ways of using narrative form in storytelling, and also the subject matter was fascinating. So, I was offered opportunities to play, a mother in a shtetl, and then up to a young woman who was in New York, who's come a survivor of the Holocaust. So there was huge kind of breadth and depth in that work. And then we did a play by Philip Osmond. So he wrote a play for the company called Buried Alive. And then that transferred to Hampstead Theatre. And then the ensemble finished, and we all went our separate ways. But then I kept in touch with Mike. I was doing quite a lot of work with David Glass, so I'd gone doing a lot of facilitation work and acting work abroad, but kept in touch with Mike. And then the next time we met up after we did the transfer of Buried Alive to Hampstead Theatre was when he went to the Globe to direct Cymbeline, and he invited me to audition for that. So I played Imogen there. And it was kind of round about that time, Peter, that we talked about doing a solo piece. It came out of all of the work that I'd done in the ensemble with Mike, definitely. But there was something about, I was very interested in the relationship, of course, between the audience and the actor. And it was very much about, that's at its most sharp. It's the most acute when you're alone on stage, because you are only making the work with the audience, co-constructing with them all the time. And I just knew that Mike was a master at that, and I was interested in telling a story and just seeing if it was possible. So we talked about that for a long time, and then we just said if material came along, then we would look at it. It was a very slow process, very organic, and we just took time. We had no idea where it would go, no idea that one solo would maybe lead to doing another. It just, as I say, happened very organically, but all of that work came out of the ensemble work. It wouldn't have been possible to do it without that.
And this ensemble work, I mean, was it a constructive time? Why did the company not go through the 3 years? Was it only 18 months? Was it a sort of, I suppose it's hard to generalize about this, but I mean, was Mike in control of his method?
Mm-hmm.
by then, and was it very, very clear kind of how you went about doing the work?
Yes, absolutely. That method was completely structured and completely present. And when I say structured, I mean there was tremendous freedom within that, but it was a very clear, defined method, and it was an absolute joy to go because it was about craft. So we were not only doing pieces of work which were going for performance, we were being taught. You know, it was like a training, you know, a kind of, it was a wonderful combination. We had other guest artists that would come, and we had voice teachers, we had dialect coaches, we had movement teachers. All of this was there for us, but Mike's method was at the core, and all of us, you know, were taught that. And used that. So yes, it underpinned everything. There was one other piece, sorry, Peter, called The Black Dahlia, which Mike Alfreds also adapted, James Elroy. So that piece as well. You know, I mean, I'm sure Mike would talk about this as well. It was a wonderful time, and it was very tough. It was very hard. You know, it was, I mean, you know, when I say that, I mean, that's what work is. So I'm not trying to mythologize that or make it into anything sort of exceptional. You know, we went in, we did our work, we grafted, and that was it. You did class, you kept yourself fit, you did voice work, you know, it was all of that. And then we would work on whatever production. And if we'd got one production up, then, you know, it would be, I suppose, equivalent of like repertory. You'd be rehearsing the next one in 10 weeks for every piece to rehearse it. Then a slight gap as something else was going in to allow that piece to drop into the body, you know, then coming back to it. And then touring as well. So it was a very intense time. One of training, as I've said, you know, one of production, one of performance, one of touring. Yeah, absolutely. I came away from it completely understanding his method, that, you know, understanding how to apply it, Peter, when I worked with other people. So that was also very important. And the thing about Mike's method is that you can use it with other people. It never ever is in conflict. So somebody else may have a particular way they want to work, you can still do Mike's method. It only enriches what you're doing. You're only going to offer whoever you're working with more. And if perhaps, as we know, sometimes there are times when relationships are not so good when you're working in any job, but then this method underpins you and gives you confidence, and you know that you can deliver, and gives you, you know, structure, skills, craft. You've got that within you. So, you know, whatever the situation, whether you're with Mike or without Mike, it's a really, that training for that method, which I had during that time, was completely invaluable. The company came to a close. I mean, you know, I think mainly it's to do with economics. You know, look, ensembles were incredibly fashionable, weren't they? In the mid-90s, everybody was doing that. It was a great thing. And of course, they mean a lot. They're important. It's about trust. It's about creating good work. But they kind of come to, from what I can remember, a fruition in the 90s where it was very much the thing to be in an ensemble. And I think actually a lot of it was, you know, audiences, the idea was that an audience would attach itself to the company. So whatever they did, a piece they knew, a piece they didn't, because they'd attached themselves to the company, they would come to see the work. But actually, it didn't kind of work out like that, because I think audiences, you know, kind of maybe were just thinking, well, I don't know that writer, so I might not see that. Or, oh, you know, there was something where that it felt like that had gone. That's my perception of it completely. But it just felt that there wasn't that sense of you know, sustainability that was happening. So, you know, I think, and then, yeah, so then it just decided that it just came to it's like a natural conclusion, actually, I would say. And we'd, you know, we'd all been trained in the method, and, you know, I think everybody probably would have liked to have continued, but at the same time, we had enough and people could go their separate ways. It was a big commitment. A lot of people had families, had mortgages. So, you know, they were to do other things. Everyone had said they wouldn't do sort of television. You know, they committed to this. That's, you know, so there were other things. It wasn't because of that. But I think that, you know, it opened up other opportunities for people. I've got a bit of hay fever, so I'm just going to have to wipe my nose. But anyway.
Never mind. While you're wiping your nose, I'll ask you a question, because you've talked about, and it's interesting. I think Mike touches on this in the 90s, saying that the audiences that were so kind of free and easy, and the centres in the 70s when he started Shared Experience, had become much more conservative with a small c by the time we got into the 90s, and so he sort of I think he echoes something of what you're saying about, an audience going, oh, well, I'm not sure. Don't know the name of that writer or whatever it might be. Another question I want to ask you, though, just to go back to the productions that you did then. Mike talks very interestingly about Black Dahlia. Were you in it?
Yes.
And how unbelievably fit you all became, because you were all kind of, pushing each other around all over the place and kind of being, I don't know if you were being macho, but apparently all the men were being incredibly macho.
I think all the women were being macho too, actually.
And so did you have all that kind? It was like I think it was circuit training or something you did. You
Yeah.
had to run
Yeah.
round the.
Yeah, I mean, we had classes with him, I mean, it was like your traditional ensemble, so there was, whether that was Feldenkrais or Tai Chi or fitness training or voice or dialect, it was really important for us to have that, and that's how the day was kind of marked up really, and marked out. Yeah, Black Dahlia was extraordinary and an incredible set. And it was lots of furniture to move around. Again, wonderful, storytelling, and his adaptation was incredible. I played lots and lots of different characters, so lots of fast changes, just a joy, really. Hard work, but yeah, I suppose you could say that. I mean, I've heard lots of directors and actors say, it is like a training and it is like an athletic. I mean, when I work with Mike, certainly on the solo work, the fitness is very important, and he would comment on fitness when we started a piece of work. Oh, you're in good shape, or oh, actually perhaps you need to do this, so it was always very central, because it's the body, isn't it? The body is what you're using, so it has to be at the top of its game, really.
One of the things that Rad said, and I think this is interesting to sort of reinforce, again, thinking about mistaking Mike's way of working with the way in which the method was done in America. Rad said, there was no attempt to delve into your personal psychology, into your, into any angst that you might have in order to release something in the performance. You left your private life, as it were, at the door when you came into rehearsal. Am I right about that?
Yeah, I think you are. I've actually made a few notes actually about this, but I think, you see, this is what's so valuable about the method, is that it's always about opening up the actor. One of the things to say, and I'm sure other people have said this, is that Mike completely empowers his actors. The hierarchy of the director and the actor role, in terms of, like in any kind of situation, it's always about empowering and liberating. And I've experienced that firsthand. His thought is always for the best for the actor. How can the actor be at their optimum? How can they be the most free? How can they be the most relaxed so they can make the best choices for that day? There's nothing manipulative. There's nothing about power, balance, and that's not to say that notes aren't tough and notes aren't absolutely laser sharp, but again, I mean, we can talk about that later, because that was another skill set I learned from Mike, was how to take a note. And I don't think it's something that actors are often talk about or are taught, but again, it's a tremendous skill to learn. How do you take a note, without it becoming personal, without feeling destroyed by it, without, and Mike teaches you how to do that, because it's always about, like you say, separating it out, using that third eye to take on the criticism, which is constructive, and then applying it. It doesn't mean to say that you might be slightly crushed by something because you think you've done something okay and maybe it isn't, or although actually Mike would always say an actor knows when they haven't really, but we all have our little tricks and things where we kind of trick ourselves into thinking something was okay when it wasn't. And I think that's the thing about him. He opens up the honesty. There's nowhere to hide, which is exactly as it should be. So to go back to your question, absolutely, you come in with who you are, so you can't pretend to be anything other than you are. And Mike would always say that, and especially in the work that we were making with the monodrama, he would say, oh, it's Jane that's here today, Jane the actor. And we used that in the piece as well, so it's not like I'm pretending to be someone else, but I explore other characters and I take on that through research and through using his method. And his method is a rigorous way of excavating forensically text. That's what he does. You know, he allows you to look at it purely from its logic, so that how do I say this line? You know, what is the actual logic of this line? And then I can interpret on top of that. But what's the logic? Stripping it right back so that you are like a forensic scientist, you know, or an archaeologist excavating, brushing away at it. Then what's underneath that? And it's always about layers with his work, I've found. So excavating text, analysing it, looking at it, re-looking at it, using these methods of points of concentration, exercises, objectives, super objectives, psychological gesture, but these are all layered into the rehearsal process, very structured. When we worked alone, we would have to mix them up quite a lot because there was only the two of us, and, you know, just to keep us bright, you know, we would kind of mix things around. When we would be working in the ensemble, we would be working perhaps on, you know, things, points of concentration maybe for a longer period of time, because you have more people and more characters. But I think it is this way of interrogating the text to bring it to life. And then you do all of that, you do all that work, examining it. And of course, if you've got 9 other actors, if you're in an ensemble with 10, you've got 9 other imaginations to work with. So you've got 9 other people feeding you suggestions of things, you know, and if you're in a trusting environment, that's really incredible because it opens up your options even more. But I think it is this idea of just, you know, doing all of this craft and rigor, knowing it's there. Mike says this, and he said it in rehearsals, I've heard him say it, and knowing it's there, it sort of sits in you, but then you go on stage and you know it's there, and then you work, you know, you don't bring that with you, it's in you, and then you start to work, and of course in the rehearsal process you use your conjecture and your imagination, but you can't do that until you've done Mike Alfreds' method, you know. But that again opens up the channels of the imagination, because we all know we have good days and bad days. Great days when we're sort of in flow, imagination's bright and burning, come up with super ideas, but you know, it's not like that all the time. And this is why I think his work is so powerful, because actually what it does is it really just sustains you. It gives you that craft, you know, so that if your imagination is not firing on all cylinders, you've got this methodology which will support you and actually allow you access to opening up your imagination. It's very pragmatic.
Couple of questions that come out of what you've said about accepting and being responsive to a note that somebody gives. What happens if you're with somebody who you don't trust and whose notes aren't terribly good? How do you respond to that? I mean, is there anything that you've learned from Mike that allows you to kind of negotiate that problem of not necessarily respecting the person that you're working with?
I think it's a really difficult situation, and especially in something like theatre, you have to find a way to respect someone. You have to find a way to do that, because I think otherwise the relationship becomes toxic and that bleeds into the work. So what I would say is that to find a baseline level of that, what Mike's work has taught me is that I think if somebody offered me a note, a director offered me a note, I would take it on board. You know, I would look at it. If I felt that there was something, I don't know, subversive about it or manipulative, then I think what Mike's method has offered me the opportunity to do is to, again, use that third eye, that stepping back objectively. What actually is the director trying to say here? You know, is it about the note, or is it about something else? Is it about the working relationship? Is it about something else? So to try to separate it out. So again, I think it's this idea of stepping back objectively, viewing the situation and assessing it. And of course, you know, that's difficult to do sometimes. So it's about taking time, isn't it, to do that? Yeah, so I think that's what it is, about stepping back, being objective.
And if I were to say to you that it sounds as if you, and I don't believe this, but okay, somebody listening to this, it sounds as if you belong to a cult. What would you say to that? Was this a cult that you were involved in? Was there some sort of, I think this is a really tricky thing with theatre, you see, is that, you know, this idea of trust, that you have to have, don't you, as an actor? Not just with the director, but with your fellow actors as well. So there is that sense of a collective spirit working together, isn't there? When does that, why is that not a cult feeling?
Well, first of all, I'd say to you that any job, if you were to do it well, you want to be in a trusting, safe environment, actually. You know, that's what you want to be, working with people that you trust, that trust you, where you can take risks, where you can be supported if you fail, where you can be celebrated if you are successful. I think it's heightened in theatre because one's using one's self. You know, you're coming in there with your body, your voice, your imagination, your memories. You're not directly bringing those into the character, but it's you that's on the line all the time, isn't it? That's there, present, available. That takes a tremendous amount of skill from a director to elicit that availability in their actor, which is what I was saying Mike does. It's not a cult because Mike's work is not a cult, because it's, as I said, it's so pragmatic, it's so practical, which doesn't mean to say that there isn't room for spontaneity, because all his work is about spontaneity and being in the moment. But you can't get that straight away. You have to graft in order to get it. You know, as I said before, you might have a couple of moments where you're lucky and you hit something and it's wonderful, but then how do you recreate that with meaning? And again, you know, Mike's method doesn't say you have to recreate everything every time. If something's working, you know, you're playing a scene, and perhaps, for example, in the Tin Ring, I used to sit on the back of a chair. And it always worked. But then, you know, there was a time when I just thought, I'm sitting on the back of the chair because I always sit on the back of the chair. Now it's time to change. It's gone stale. Mike would say, what else can you do? So it's not about changing it for the sake of it. It's changing it, and when it needs to be changed. It's when it's run out, when there's nothing left of it. But, you know, again, the work that Mike teaches is all about this kind of practical way to do that. So it's not a cult because there are clear guidelines and steps to go to. But then, of course, within that, one can, you know, choose to focus on, you know, things. I mean, I suppose, you know, like with all exercises, for example, Peter, I find actions difficult. So that's one part of Mike's work, you know, that you look at the text and you action the text. So I can do that, but then you play it and you play the action. So for example, in a sentence, you know, it could be one action, it could be several actions, depending on the length of the sentence, actually. And then you play that, but each action has to be different, and each action springboards from the last action. There's something about working with the intellect, the head, because you're intellectualizing it, as well as the kind of physicalizing it and the intuition, that I kind of sometimes I kind of struggle with that. So there are some exercises that are not easy, you know, but it's again just about working through it. And then there are other ones where you know, you know, you just you flow with those. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is it's not like it's ABC. It's kind of a one size fits all. It's unique to whoever is working on the production. It's unique to the individuals, and it celebrates the uniqueness of the individual. You know, that's what Mike does. He celebrates the uniqueness of his individuals, and then their acting and how that can manifest itself, you know, in the work.
Interestingly, about actions, Mike sort of surprised me when we got onto the section in the conversations we had. He surprised me by saying he's not dogmatic, in the sense that that it's not always kind of an active verb, which I know another well-known director always used. But he also said, you know, if you can't find the word, you can just make the noise.
Yeah.
You know, you, or whatever it might be, or, you know, so that it doesn't have to be so intellectual that you know, because he said there are some actors who've got fantastic vocabularies and can come up with thousands of actions, and there are other actors who haven't necessarily got that skill, you know, and so what?
Yeah.
You stop them being good actors.
Absolutely, that's it. And again, you see, you've got a director there who's flexible. You know, he's working with the, you know, the flexibility of the ensemble. I think it's rare, Peter. I think it's rare.
So I was blown away in the 70s by a production of Cymbeline that Shared Experience did. At Sheffield, I saw it, 5 actors on the stage, nothing.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's gone down in the kind of annals of history as one of the sort of great Shakespeares, well, certainly for me and so a lot of other people that I've talked to. You go to the Globe and you do Cymbeline.
Mhm.
As an objective audience, which of course you're not, did it work?
Yes, it did. I mean, it was the same principle. It's, we were dressed in sort of, neutral clothing. It was a small company, a small ensemble. Um, People played multiple parts. I didn't, but that was only because Imogen just went through it, but yeah, yes, I think yes, it did work. It worked in that setting because it's all about telling the stories and allowing the audience to use their imagination. Of course, you're in the open air. So you've got all the elements there as well. And the audience is so close and there's so many of them. So I'd worked in pieces with him at the Young Vic where the audience are very close and it's very intimate, almost, and almost in the round, but so again, more intimate. But at the Globe, I didn't expect it to have that intimacy, but he did. And I think his work created that, the way he allowed the story to unfold and the telling of it and its simplicity.
And did it? I mean, I know a lot of his productions did happen in big theatres, but did it reach out? You're saying it was an intimate experience. I mean, did all the people who came to see it that you knew, did they say you really kind of reached us?
I think so. I mean, I hope so. I mean, you never know, do you? I mean, people that I saw came to see it, but then I suppose people would come to support anyway, so they'd probably be very say supportive things. But I think probably there was also people who would say things that, they would be constructive as well. Yeah, I think it does. I think I think it did, because I think that the space itself elicits that, but of course that again, and Mike talks about this, Peter Brook talks about this, doesn't he? The great test for an actor is how do you retain an intimacy, but at the same level, you can be heard in the back row, that your technique when you are using your voice is it's so centered that you can be almost whispering but yet still be heard. So again, Mike's work, his own work that he does, is laser sharp kinds of, knowing when a voice isn't centered. He can just say it instantly because he has the experience of that. He's listened to so many actors over the years and he knows it intuitively. But then he'll also bring in specialists to support as well, and he will also expect you to do work on your own, every day with your voice if you're working with him, in order to keep it in top condition, like you would if you were training to be do a triathlon or whatever. It's part of the job, isn't it? But again, it goes back to actions, objectives, points of concentration, playing with your colleagues on stage, your colleagues, that's academic because I'm in academia now, but playing with your fellow actors, being excited for spontaneity, being excited to offer something, and surprised and excited when something comes back, and being able to play with that. That's what he sets up. It doesn't always happen, of course, like that, but again, like I said, with the method, you never drop below something, I think, as well. You've always got that, and you always got that capacity. There was a run of performances of Demons and Dibbocks we did at Oxford Playhouse, and that was the first time I really felt there was this kind of the whole ensemble, somehow we were flowing, we were just bouncing, and that was interesting because we'd done a lot of work already, so maybe that's about where the company was at that time. We'd done a bit of touring, we got to know each other, we were building up, we were getting ready for the next piece, we already had one under our belts, and and some of that, the reviews had been quite harsh, so we'd kind of, we'd had to work through that as well. So there was a sense of camaraderie, there was a sense of play, a sense of trust, a sense of risk taking, with that. But it has to be cultivated all the time. It doesn't just happen. Yeah. Does it? It's not magic.
Yeah. Okay, so Jane, you said that there was this long gestation, sort of organic process, because you wanted to do it. Did you actually want to do a one-person show with Mike? So you had this in the back of your head. You didn't have the material yet.
No, no.
And then you found something.
Yeah, I did. I'd go and see pieces of work with Mike. We go to the theatre together or the cinema, and we talk about things we'd seen and been inspired by. And this thing about doing a solo piece, you know, kept sort of ticking over. And then I was offered an opportunity. I'd done a lot of work with the David Glass Company in Cambodia, and I'd become very interested in the documentation centre there, which is a place which archives witness testimony from the genocide. And as a result of that, the Newcastle City Council asked if I'd talk about that at one of the Holocaust memorial events in Newcastle that they do every year to mark that day in January, 27th of January. So they asked if I would just talk a little bit about the work at the Documentation Centre. And so I did that. And then afterwards they said, well, would you perhaps like to curate the next year, the whole event? So I said, okay, that would be wonderful. I'd like to do that. And they said, we have our keynote speaker. It's a woman called Zdenka Fantlova. She's Czech and she lives in London. Here's her book. It's been published in America called Your Lucky Star. It's not in print anymore. Read this and then go and meet her. So I did that. There's a long, I'm sorry, this is so circuitous and long, but there is a point to this. So I read the book, reading it as somebody who would just be interviewing this, or just talking to this person about her being the keynote speaker. And then about 2/3 of the way through the book, I thought, oh, I wonder if this could be a one-person piece of performance. It is a memoir, and it's Zdenka was 18, 19 when war broke out, the Second World War. She lived in Rokycany in Bohemia in Czechoslovakia. She was Jewish, but you know, not particularly practicing. You know, so and went through the Second World War, and it's her memoir to that. And so I thought that. So when I met Zdenka, who lived in London, I talked to her about the event, and then I said, I don't know how you feel about this, but might this be possible? And she said, well, I don't know how you do it. There's lots of people in it, but why don't you have a go? And I'm happy for you to try. And she said, have you got anyone in mind who could direct this? Without going on too much about this, Zdenka became an actress. So after the Second World War, she went to Sweden. She recovered there. She stayed there for a little while. Then she went to Australia. Then she came back to London. But in Australia, she was an actress. So there was an interest. She was interested in that. So I said, well, actually, yes, I do. It's somebody called Mike Alfreds. So that was the beginning of it, really. So she said, yes. So she was that. So as it turned out, so I sent the book to Mike. We actually were able to get the book published in my colleague from the City Council and in England. So it was published and called The Tin Ring. And Mike read it, and then he met Zdenka, and Zdenka lived very near Mike. So that was also very interesting. So Zdenka and I got on the bus and went down to Mike's, and then Zdenka had some VHSs of her doing some interviews. And so we all met and talked, and that was the start of it, really. And Mike, when he read the book, said, yes, I think this is very good material. We can use this. And that's how it started, really.
Wow. And how long was, because I remember talking to Mike over this whole period. Are we talking about a year, 2 years worth of a process? How?
Well, we started adapting it in 2011. 2010, actually, we probably started really looking at it. And then, so 2011, we got some Arts Council England funding to do the research and development phase. So we did 30 minutes. We didn't know how much we'd have, but we managed to get 30 minutes worth of performance, and we put that up in front of an audience. So 70 people at Northern Stage in Newcastle upon Tyne. Zdenka was in the audience. It was just open. There were no tickets or anything, but people were invited. And that was really to see how Zdenka felt about it in public with the people there, and if it could be endorsed to maybe continued, and it was successful, so we did. And then the Lowry in Salford had also supported it in its research and development phase as well. And Robert Robson, it was just, they were incredible. They knew Mike's work. I mean, again, this all goes back to Mike. I was working with someone, people knew Mike, they respected Mike, they valued him, they knew his work was going to be, so they would invest in that. And so they were a partner, and then they continued. So we were able to then go back to the Arts Council England, and we were successful, and we got another project grant, individual grant for the arts, and we were able to take it further, and we took it to Edinburgh. I mean, it's still, it's been to 16 countries. And
Wow.
yeah, so
You've toured it with just 16 countries.
yeah.
With Mike, or do you go on your own?
And yeah, Mike's was there. Zdenka would come at the beginning, you know. Zdenka will be, she was 99 on March the 28th, she'll be 100 next year. But Zdenka would come. We'd do, I became an academic in 2011, so we would do conferences, and Zdenka would be there, Mike would be there. We went to Speaker's House with it, and Mike was there. So we'd do talks afterwards.
Tremendous. Gosh. So that's something that you're still performing or not?
Yes, I do. When it's invited, I do. We made, because of COVID, it was invited to a festival in New Jersey, an international theatre festival last October. Because of COVID, we couldn't go. So I was granted permission by the publisher, McNider and Grace, to make a theatre film, I've called it. So we just filmed the production and did it twice through. So that exists. And Yad Vashem are going to archive that as well. So also people will, when they visit the Yad Vashem Museum, will be able to view that as well if they wish. So it's had an incredible journey. You know, Mike and I are credited as adapting it together. I would say that my contribution was when we were in rehearsals with that, but he's the master of it. You know, he's just, the way he was able to dissect that book and pick out the you know, the important storytelling moments, offers of choice, which routes we would take, different narrative forms that we would try out. I mean, it was just an extraordinary journey to go on, a learning journey, still a learning journey, you know, for me. You know, things I thought were dramatic actually didn't work, you know, so things I was very, very stuck on, very liked very much, you know, Mike would explain, this doesn't work. So again, you know, this incredible sense of learning, crafting a piece, you know, I was able to watch that, him do that, pick it apart, sew it back together, you know, and he would say, oh, I've had this moment and I've had this thought and I think this, and, you know, that would be a moment of inspiration, but it came out of his incredible, you know, expertise.
There's a lovely moment where, in talking of sort of moments of inspiration, where Ian McKellen says, you know, you can get a director who will go, oh, I think everything needs to be purple, you know, and McKellen says, you know, for that moment, maybe something could be purple, but for the whole production, no.
Yeah.
So, you know, the idea that, you know, I suppose you call it director's theatre, where I've got this concept and I want you all to fit into this concept that I've got. And I mean, that is very much not what Mike does. That sort of way in which he will try and just, as you said about the text, you know, is kind of respond to what's there in the text. But also the way he talks so interestingly when he was doing Bleak House, about how, I think his metaphor was, you know, a stock, how you kind of bring a stock, I don't know, to concentrate a stock. And bringing this massive text, sort of almost 1,000 pages down.
Yeah.
He did that a lot with the actors. I think they were working from chapter to paragraph to he said, to line to word, you know.
I think that's it, as a distilling process, actually, the way you describe that. And I think that's exactly what it is. But it's collaborative, you know. I mean, the director's role is very important, and Mike is a brilliant director, and he takes that on, and he knows, but what I'm saying is he knows what that role is, and so he's there to take responsibility, you know, for what's happening. And you that's needed, because when you're acting, you know, you're taking responsibility for the work that you're creating, you're taking responsibility for the work you're making with an audience, taking responsibility for the work you're making with your ensemble. But you can't take responsibility for everything else. That's the directors doing that. But the thing about what you said about, Imogen said about the purple, it's like there's no sort of there's no flights of fancy. It's always about the work. It's always about what's best for the actor. I honestly have never worked with anyone where I really, truly believed that the director really wanted the best. You know, I know that the directors, he'll have doubts and things. Of course, you know, it's part of the natural creative process. But it's like he manages to not allow that to go onto the actor somehow, because the actor's already having their own doubts. You know, that's part of the process. So it's an incredibly skilled way of driving the ship, you know, or captaining the ship. but you feel you're on a team, that's the thing. Yeah.
So, Jane, there's a second one-person project.
Yeah.
Am I right?
There is. So we made the tin ring, and we had an extraordinary time doing that. And again, like I said, a great creative learning, and it came to much more than we could have hoped for, and relationships that we developed and partnerships was wonderful. And and then we said, if another piece of material pops up, then we'll do it. But again, we weren't going to go out looking for it or searching for it. And Mike had lots of projects to do, and was very busy. And, so that was that. And a professor of drama at New York University, Carol Martin, had seen the research and development at a conference in Utrecht, a performance studies international conference. And we'd got chatting and talking, and she'd invited me to New York to do the 30 minutes. And she was a great advocate of the tin ring. She used it with her students. She invited me to play, wherever she could, she would champion the work. Mike's books went to NYU, and all of this. So then she sent a book to me called Year of Wonders by Geraldine Brooks. And she also sent the same book to Mike. Neither of us knew that we'd had it. We both read it separately. We met up one summer and said, got this book from Carol Martin, Year of Wonders by Geraldine Brooks, what a fantastic novel. And then we both started chatting, and Mike said, I wonder, do you think Carol's thinking we could adapt this? So I said, I wonder if she is. So I wrote to Carol and said, we both got the book, we both think it's great. Was that your plan? And she said, well, I think it would be a great one to do. So that was really wonderful. So then I said, well, do you know Geraldine Brooks? And she said, no, I don't, but I think I can probably find, a contact email for you. So Geraldine Brooks is Australian. She lives in America now, and she was a journalist, and she's also obviously a very prolific writer, award-winning writer. So I wrote to her, and I just sent a very brief email, and I sent some information on the tin ring and said, this is what we would like to do. Is it possible? And she, like Zdenka, was incredibly generous. She got in touch with her agent and, ICM, and they, so I mentioned this because this was, these were big players, but they were incredibly generous, incredibly supportive, said yes, but said there was a Hollywood film, there was a film option on the book, so they would have to check. And it turned out that there wasn't anything in the contract that a theatre show couldn't be done. But the only thing was that we would never, ever be able to record any of it, even in rehearsal, even for archive. That was the only thing. So I said, no problem, we'll do that, it's okay. So we did. So we adapted that, and we did that in 2019. So that opened. The Lowry partnered that again. It's still there, and then COVID came along, so it's sort of still there. So it would be very wonderful to be able to do it again. It would be fantastic in the future to do it again.
So when did you open it?
We opened it at the Lowry. We opened it in the studio in Salford.
What, at the end of 2019? Or?
Yeah, it was July 2019, and then I had was it 20? No, it was 2018. I'm sorry, 2018. And then I had a fellowship. I'd won a Leverhulme International Academic Fellowship, so I went off to Poland to do that, and then came back and had other things, and then COVID hit. So, but it's there, it's opened. It's done performances, and it played Lowry studio, and then it came to Newcastle and play and Durham. So it's one to be, to be continued, but it exists and it's there.
And you presumably you'll need to get back with Mike and work on it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we definitely have to go back to that. I mean, that's one of the other things, actually, Peter, just to say that with Mike's work about the editing process, with all the adaptation work that we did with the ensemble, it's a constant, it's a living, it's work that's alive all the time. So you're editing all the time, like you were saying, the shared experience, and with the Bleak House, it doesn't stop. Performances, what I learned was to be very, very slightly able to do that a little myself. So I would offer and say, I don't think I need this word. I don't think I can say, I can do that. I don't need to say it. But that was because I learned that, But this is a constant thing with his work. It's living work that's being, edited down all the time as it becomes more embodied. Mm-hmm. The text becomes more distilled.
And so, Jane, do you, with the work that you do at the university, do you actually teach practical theatre? Do you sort of
I do. I mean, I do. I mean, it's a theatre and performance undergraduate degree program. So we look at theory. We're looking at context, of course. And it's contemporary theatre that we're teaching. But yeah, the doing is very important. The practical, and right from the beginning, 2011. Mike's first book was out, Different Every Night. Then What Happens was coming out. They're in the library. I was teaching Mike's work. Mike was a visiting fellow for 4 years. Getting him in was very important, to talk to the students, to share his practice. He was very busy and much in demand elsewhere. So we were very grateful to have that. But it was really important. But that's what I teach. I teach Mike Alfreds' work method, from how I've been taught. I pass that on, and then with him feeding into that too, as many people that you've spoken to, who I know there are other people who've set up their own theatre schools, and it underpins all of it. So
Jane, I'm going to bring this to a close. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed that chat. And if you did, would you press the like button, and also the subscribe button? That would be great. And if you wanted to be given alerts to when the next one is happening, just press the bell button. If you want to put any comments or any questions underneath here, underneath the video, please do, and at some point I will re-interview Mike, as it were, and put some of these questions to him. So I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.